Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going east to East Asia to explore Taiwan.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, we're going to try to unpack its history and vibrant culture and its unique place in the world. We've got a ton of info from Wikipedia to help guide us. So think of this as your crash course on everything Taiwan.
Yeah, it's a story full of twists and turns, that's for sure. Taiwan's history is very layered.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much of it is still playing out today, on the world stage.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing that struck me when looking at this stuff is just how far back it goes. I mean, people have been living there for like 25,000 years at least.
Yeah.
That's wild.
That's a really long time. I mean, to put that in perspective, that's before like a lot of major civilizations that we even think about today. And what's really fascinating is that indigenous peoples arrived there around 6,000 years ago, and they laid the foundation for the island's diversity, which continues to define Taiwan even to this day.
Totally. And it gets even more interesting when like the outside influence starts coming in. Like, did you know that the Dutch established a colony in Taiwan in the 17th century?
Right.
I had no idea.
Most people don't realize that the Dutch had such a kind of pivotal role in shaping Taiwan. And it wasn't even just them being there, but kind of the aftereffects, right? Because their presence actually triggered this big wave of migration from mainland China, Han Chinese specifically.
So they were kind of like the accidental architects of modern Taiwan almost.
It's true. Yeah, it's fascinating how that happened. Of course, they didn't, intend to do that.
Right.
But their influence on Taiwan's ethnic makeup is undeniable.
Oh, for sure.
And this trend of outside influence continued.
Right.
From the Dutch, the Qing dynasty took control, and then Japan in 1895.
I was going to say the Qing dynasty I get because it's so close, but Japan in 1895. That's so interesting.
Yeah, it's a lesser-known chapter, I think, in both Taiwan and Japan's history, but this shift in power came about because of the Treaty of Shimonoseki. It basically handed control of Taiwan over to Japan after the First Sino-Japanese War. So for 50 years, Japan ruled Taiwan and brought about a ton of social and cultural changes.
Yeah, they, from what I understand, invested heavily in infrastructure.
They did, yeah. They modernized a lot of aspects of the island, but it was still very much a colonial situation,
Right.
They had their own interests at heart.
Totally. And during that time, they actually tried to assimilate the Taiwanese people through this movement called Kaminka.
Right.
What was that about?
Yeah, so Kameka was basically their attempt to, make Taiwanese people more Japanese. In a lot of ways, their practices, their language, even their beliefs. It was a very deliberate policy.
Wow.
Cultural engineering, essentially. And it had a lasting impact on Taiwanese society, even after they left. So you can imagine the cultural shifts and pushback that was happening from the Taiwanese people. It wasn't just like, oh, you're in control. It's like, you're trying to reshape who we are.
Right, yeah. It's interesting to consider how different aspects of Taiwanese culture, resisted that assimilation. Did certain traditions, certain values, were they able to kind of stay strong?
Well, that's a great question. And it really speaks to the resilience of Taiwanese culture. Because even under Japanese rule, they were clinging to their own distinct identity. And you really see this in things like the persistence of local dialects, the religious practices, family traditions even. All those things kind of endured.
So after 50 years of Japanese rule, we get to kind of a pivotal moment, right? World War II ends.
Right.
And the whole political landscape is shifting again. And that's where the Republic of China, the ROC, comes in.
Exactly. With Japan's defeat, the ROC took control of Taiwan in 1945. But you have to remember, at that time, the ROC saw itself as the government of all of China,
Right.
including the mainland.
It's about to get a lot more complicated, though, right? Because the Chinese Civil War kind of throws another wrench in things.
Yeah, it does. It was simmering in the background, and it reemerges, and this time the communists, they win.
Oh.
So in 1949, the ROC government, led by Chiang Kai-shek, they're forced to flee mainland China.
Wow.
And set up a new base in Taiwan.
So they basically said, all right, Taiwan, you're the new seat of the ROC.
Yeah.
While the mainland became the People's Republic of China under Mao Zedong.
That's right.
And that kind of sets the stage for this whole two-China situation.
Exactly. And what's really important is that at the beginning, the ROC in Taiwan still considered itself the real government of all of China.
Wow.
Including the mainland.
So they were in exile, but still claiming the mainland as their own.
Yeah. They even defined Taiwan separately as the Taiwan area in their official documents.
Wild. I mean, you can just imagine the political tension during this time. But in the middle of all this upheaval, Taiwan goes through this incredible transformation. I'm talking about the Taiwan miracle.
right?
What led to this sudden economic boom?
It's really remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah.
They go from this war-torn nation to this economic powerhouse in just a few decades.
Yeah.
And it really speaks to the people and some really smart decisions.
Yeah.
Land reform was huge early on. By basically redistributing land to farmers, they boosted agricultural productivity and created a stable base for growth.
Okay.
And then you had aid from the United States,
Right.
which helped jumpstart their industrial development.
So it's not any one thing.
Right.
It was kind of like a perfect storm almost.
Yeah, a perfect storm of planning and support. And let's not forget the hard work of the Taiwanese people.
Right, of course.
I mean, they embraced this opportunity to rebuild and redefine their future.
what were some of the things they focused on?
Well, they really focused on industries like electronics,
Okay.
textiles, things that they could export, right?
Right.
They wanted to tap into that global market. And it worked. By the 1980s, Taiwan was a major player.
I mean, that's incredible. A real success story.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, a big part of that was the rise of a really strong manufacturing sector. Were there any unforeseen consequences during this time of such rapid economic growth?
Yeah, that's a good question. And you're right, it wasn't all smooth sailing. When you grow that fast, there are bound to be bumps in the road.
Right.
You know, there were concerns about the environment, income inequality started to become a problem, even like social unrest.
So the growing pains of success, in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But you know what's really interesting is how Taiwan dealt with those issues.
Yeah.
They adapted, right?
All right.
They tweaked their policies, tried to find a more balanced approach to growth. They were willing to learn and adapt as they went.
It's a good reminder that progress isn't always linear.
That's for sure.
And speaking of change, alongside this economic transformation, Taiwan's also going through a political shift. They're starting to transition toward democracy.
Right.
What were the driving forces behind that?
Well, it's really fascinating when you think about it, right? You've got this incredible economic growth happening, but at the same time, there's this growing desire for political freedom, for self-determination.
So people wanted more say in how their country was run.
Exactly. And key figures like Chiang Ching-kuo, Chiang Kai-shek's son, he recognized that need for change.
Interesting.
He started loosening the grip on power a bit, giving more autonomy to native Taiwanese. Remember, they had been kind of marginalized under his father's rule.
So it sounds like there was this internal push from the Taiwanese people themselves.
Yeah.
But were there also like external factors that encouraged the ROC to kind of go down this path of democratic reform?
Oh, for sure. I mean, internationally, you have this huge wave of, pro-democracy movement.
Right. This is like around the time the Berlin Wall falls.
Exactly. Exactly. You've got the fall of the Berlin Wall. You've got these democratic uprisings in Eastern Europe.
Yeah.
The ROC couldn't just ignore all of that, especially if they wanted to stay chummy with allies like the U.S.
Right. They wanted to be on the right side of history, so to speak.
Exactly. So all of this pressure, both internal and external, kind of culminates in this really pivotal moment. In 1987, the ROC officially lifts martial law in Taiwan.
Wow.
Which was a huge step towards becoming a full-fledged democracy.
And that paved the way for their very first democratic presidential election in 1996.
Yeah, 1996.
I mean, what a moment for the Taiwanese people.
Oh, absolutely. It was a celebration of, hard-won freedoms.
Yeah.
This transition to a multi-party democracy, it really sent a message to the world that Taiwan, was charting its own course.
Yeah.
But it also kind of complicated their relationship with mainland China even more.
Right, because as Taiwan is moving towards, democracy and more autonomy, the PRC never gave up their claim to the island.
Exactly, yeah.
And that kind of leads us to this really delicate dance that Taiwan still has to do today. Like, on the one hand, you have this thriving democracy. It's a technological powerhouse, but it exists in this very, very politically sensitive space.
It's this constant balancing act, right?
Right.
I mean, domestically, you have these two main political camps. The Pan-Green Coalition, they kind of lean towards just formally declaring independence, let's just do it.
Right.
And then you have the Pan-Blue Coalition, who are, they favor eventual unification with mainland China.
Okay.
So both sides have their own idea of what the future should look like.
Right.
And that creates a very interesting or dynamic, I guess, political landscape, to say the least.
For sure, for sure. And then externally, you have this, one China policy that so many countries, including the U.S., adhere to.
Right.
So how does Taiwan even manage to maintain relationships internationally when, most of the world officially recognizes the PRC?
Right. Well, that's where it gets really, really interesting. So the One China principle, it acknowledges the PRC's claim over Taiwan, but it doesn't really say like how other countries should handle their own policies with Taiwan, you
Oh,
know?
interesting.
So it's kind of left open to interpretation. So
Hmm.
even though a country might officially recognize the PRC, they can still have these unofficial ties with Taiwan,
Okay.
which allows for things like economic and cultural exchanges to continue.
So it's like this very careful diplomatic dance that they have to do.
Exactly. And then on top of that, you have the one country, two systems framework, which the PRC has offered as this like model for unification.
Right. Which we've seen play out in Hong Kong.
Yeah, exactly. In theory, it would let Taiwan keep its own economic and political systems, even after unification.
Mhm.
However, I think, what happened in Hong Kong recently has made a lot of people in Taiwan very skeptical of that model, understandably so.
Right. It kind of throws a wrench in things, to say the least.
Yeah, it definitely complicates matters even further.
It's a lot to wrap your head around. But even with all of this kind of political baggage, the Taiwanese people have built this incredibly vibrant, resilient society.
Oh, absolutely.
What are some of the things about Taiwanese culture that really stand out to you?
Oh, man. Well, you can't talk about Taiwan without talking about the food.
Right.
I mean, have you ever been to a Taiwanese night market?
I've heard they're amazing.
Oh, they're incredible. The sights, the smells, just the variety of dishes is incredible.
Yeah.
It's an experience everyone should have.
And of course, there's bubble tea,
Oh, yeah, of course.
which originated in Taiwan.
Yep, took the world by storm.
I mean, come on, who doesn't love bubble tea?
It's true, it's true.
But it's not just the food. Taiwan has this really fascinating mix of influences. You've got traditional Chinese culture, you've got this legacy of Japanese colonialism, and then, of course, their own indigenous traditions all kind of blended together. It creates a very, very unique cultural landscape. And speaking of unique, Taiwan actually has a really impressive amount of linguistic diversity for such a, relatively small island nation.
It's true.
So I know Mandarin Chinese is the most widely spoken, but there are other Chinese varieties like Taiwanese Hokkien, Hakka. Is there a movement to preserve these different languages, especially in a world where Mandarin is so dominant?
Yeah, there's definitely a growing awareness of the importance of protecting Taiwan's linguistic diversity. They've started these language revitalization programs and even incorporated, these languages into their education system, which is awesome.
That's great.
Yeah, it's really cool
Yeah.
to see them actively embracing that kind of multifaceted heritage.
It speaks to, I think, a larger point about their determination to forge their own path.
Yeah.
They haven't let all of this political stuff overshadow their cultural vibrancy or their, ambition on the world stage.
And I think that's what makes Taiwan so fascinating. They really punch above their weight. I mean, look at their technology.
Right.
Taiwan is a semiconductor powerhouse.
Totally.
I mean, companies like Apple rely heavily on Taiwanese chip manufacturers.
Yeah, they're a vital part of the global supply chain. It's a good reminder that this little island nation has a global impact.
That's for sure.
This has been an incredible deep dive.
Yeah, it has.
I feel like we've covered thousands of years of history, ancient origins to modern day complexities. And it really leaves you thinking about all the potential scenarios that lie ahead,
Oh, yeah.
not just for Taiwan, but for the region and, frankly, the world.
Absolutely. Taiwan's story is far from over.
Not even close.
It's this story of resilience, adaptation, and this constant pursuit of self-determination, And I think it's a story that everyone should be paying attention to.
It's a story that deserves our attention and our understanding. So thank you for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.